Hello, everybody, and welcome to today's webinar, which will be delivered by Andrew Wright from Action Your Potential. Thank you so much for joining us today, and I'd like to start with a very quick sound check to make sure the audio is working for everybody. So if you could please just type yes into the questions box on your screen, and if you can hear me, if you can just type yes into that questions box, and I'll be keeping an eye on that so I can see your answers coming in. Yeah, lovely. All yeses there, that's fantastic. Thank you so much for doing that for me. Looks like it's all working. Okay, so my name's Louise and I'm a project facilitator for the Southern Universities Network. The SUN is a partnership of 6 universities and part of a wider programme called Uni Connect. The central aim of Uni Connect is to reduce the gap in higher education participation between the most and least represented groups. And the webinar that you're taking part in today forms part of the staff CPD element of that programme. Today's webinar is being recorded so that you can share it with your colleagues after the event, and you're very welcome to post questions in the questions box throughout the presentation. You guys all know where that is now because you just typed yes in it for me. So we'll have 2 points for questions throughout the webinar where we can discuss them, and we'll, as I said, just feel free to just pop them in throughout the presentation as they come to you. If you can, I'd really encourage you just to stop for a couple of moments at the end of the webinar, just for a few short evaluation questions, just so we can gain your feedback. And again, back to the questions box, I'll be keeping an eye on that throughout. So if you have any audio or tech related questions or issues that you're having, just let me know. And hopefully we can sort those out for you. So for example, if you can't see the PowerPoint, so for example, the PowerPoint's on the screen now. So if you can't see it for any reason, just let me know. Or if the sound drops out, also just let me know. And of course, please do carry on posting your questions for Andrew in that box. We can go and ask him those questions throughout the presentation too. Okay, so without any further ado, I'm going to hand over to our presenter today, who is Andrew. So Andrew, thank you very much. Over to you. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Louise, and thanks everyone for joining us. So my mission over the next 45 minutes is to get you excited about the bit of kit at the top of your necks, the human brain, and to talk a little bit about, well, quite a lot actually, about well-being and how we can support ourselves, but importantly, how we can support students and parents to work on well-being as a daily activity. So the whole theme of today's focus is building NeuroNinjas. So our company spends most of its day running about the place, supporting at the moment 100 schools, students and parent facing, particularly working on helping people understand their brain. So we're going to go into that kind of area. Now, I've got lots of videos embedded in my PowerPoint, but they don't really work inside GoWebinar. So what we're going to do is we'll drop the links to those videos into the chat at the end, and you can catch up on those bits. They're worth it because they kind of add a bit of detail and a bit of value to some of the things that I'm talking about. So you've got everything you need at the top of your neck. My kind of work in the company is kind of linked to what I used to do. So before I had the opportunity to take voluntary redundancy from a leadership team in a school in East Sussex, I was a biology teacher. I've been a Senko. I've got an MA in education. But basically, forget all that stuff. I am a huge brain nerd. I'm absolutely fascinated by the human brain. And in the last 15 years or so, it's got incredibly interesting. And we can connect up what's going on in brains with what's happening in terms of the mind and the psychology and pedagogy. So we're linking neuroscience, we're linking psychology, we're linking pedagogy, we're linking health sciences in a kind of interdisciplinary way. And the company that we've set up, do follow us on social media. We are unabashedly positive about the human brain and all its capacities, and that's what we're going to try and share with you today. The tools, really, the tools that help people change their brains. We can change our brains. Amazing. So 86 billion neurons eventually at the top of our necks after a bit of synaptic pruning during the course of development. We've got 86 billion neurons. There are more connections possible in a pea-sized bit of the brain than there are grains of sand on all the beaches across the whole planet. The human brain can carry out a billion calculations a second. A supercomputer doing the same thing would take 40 minutes. And yet We feel rubbish some days, and yet we tell ourselves a whole manner of stuff about how we can't possibly do things, how we're feeling kind of low and anxious, and we get ourselves in a right old tiz. And the reason for that is the brain has been designed for survival, not to manage the complexity of the 21st century. So we're going to look all of that stuff as we talk about it today. So the neuroscience revolution is going to change everything. One day, what I'm talking about will be part of the curriculum in schools. We need to design our school system around the human brain. It is partly based around the human brain in terms of, research in teaching and learning has moved us to a space where we're doing things that are beneficial. But once you understand the way the brain works, it does mean that you tweak practice. For example, the link between well-being and productivity and progress is very well established in the literature, and maybe not yet well established in some of the ways that some of the experiences in school happen. And as an ex-free school meal child myself, I'm getting on a bit now, and my free school meals, my milk was stolen from me by Mrs. Thatcher when she was education secretary in the 1970s, and I was at primary school. She got rid of free milk for kids. So, and I am the first member of my family to go to university, and I was a free school meal child. So I'm very, very, very passionate about this area in terms of closing the gap. And we're going to talk about the gap today. We're going to talk about the gap in a new way. So the neuroscience revolution is going to change everything. It's going to change medicine. It's going to change the criminal justice system. It's going to change education. And when you get to see this video, it's an extremely inspiring video of a Royal Marine experiencing the symptoms of Parkinson's disease, and neuroscience gets involved in his treatment. I won't even attempt to play it because I don't think you'll get the full experience, but we'll drop that link into the chat and you can watch it a little bit later. So the way that we talk to young people and parents and teachers about brains is to say that the future is already here. It's just not evenly distributed yet. And that's one of my favorite quotes from William Gibson, the sci-fi author. What it means is that basically we're living in a neurally plastic brain, and whatever we want to happen in the future, we need to start enacting in our day. Basically, a set of detailed habits will move our brain in particular directions. And obviously every brain's different. So the habits that are required, the particular responses might be a little bit different for everyone. And it's all about supporting students in the undiscovered country of the future by teaching them the incredible power of their brain, how to get the most out of it, how to manage well-being, how to manage learning through a series of daily behaviors. So really two sets of daily behaviors. One's associated with learning. We call them the 10 leaps in learning. These are the daily behaviors that we all need to carry out to support the brain's learning and memory systems. For example, we forget 70% of our learning experiences every day, and that is a design feature of the brain. It's not a bug, it's the way the brain's been designed. So unless children do something with the information that we're pouring into their heads in lessons, that it's going to fall out the bottom of their heads and not get encoded. And so, we do some of that stuff in our lessons, we build in retrieval practice and all of those kind of things. But actually, we need them to understand that there's something they need to do, and we need to support parents to do that as well. So we know very strongly from neuroscience that habits change the brain, and we can improve motivation, learning, memory, and well-being. And let's think about the gap in a different way. So, as a nation, when we look at the gap, and this was before COVID, the Institute of Education was looking at the gap and the progress we've made as a nation. I speak here as an ex-pupil premium lead in a big secondary school, and knowing how difficult it is to close the gap. The gap will close over the next 300 years if we keep going at the rate we're going nationally at the moment. So where is the gap is a really interesting question to ask. So let's explore that kind of idea. Is the gap in the classroom? Well, we're doing that ongoing quality assurance process. Teaching and learning is on an upward swing. There's a huge level of investment in supporting teachers to develop their practice. Pedagogy is well supported. There's lots of kind of exploration of supporting the improvement in teaching and learning. And if there is a gap in the classroom, we're constantly working to close it. So it's probably not there. Is it in the school? Again, we've got Ofsted, we've got SLTs, we've got quality assurance, we've got school improvement plans. There's a huge amount of energy and effort going into looking at gaps in schools. Probably not there. Is it in the home? Well, you know, in the home environment. Well, we know that children from difficult, disadvantaged backgrounds, where there's lots of kind of complexity, it might be health needs, a whole range of other issues. We know that for some of those children, they might arrive at the age of 5 having experienced 30 million less words, for example. So there are gaps kind of already in their kind of experience of the world. Is it in the daily behaviors we carry out? Yes, 1,000 times yes. It's around supporting everyone to understand that there's a set of daily behaviors. The brain is very keen on routines, and routines build structures in the brain. So 85% is the amount of time children spend at home. 6 hours in school, 18 hours at home, 85%, and that is in a normal year. And obviously this is not a normal year. Children have spent a lot more time at home as well. So where is the point of maximum leverage for change? It's in a range of places, but one massive area is in the daily behaviors that children enact, and that we as a community of a school support everyone to understand there's a set of responses that unleash the awesome power of the brain. So that's what we're going to look at. And we're also going to talk about how we might apply maximum leverage in the gap. So tonight I'm going to talk about well-being and anxiety and mental health related issues. And next time, just after Christmas, in January, we're going to talk about learning and the learning behaviors. So, like I said, our nation is stuck on a social escalator, and we're not really moving people up that social escalator. People have ended up kind of in a stuck place, and I've mentioned the kind of the length of time that's going to happen. So we need to unleash the power of the day every day, and then enable the brain to change itself. I'm sorry about my dogs barking at the delivery. Okay, so we're going to look now at well-being. We're going to look at the 12 rocks of well-being and explore what they are. So today we're looking at that and neuroscience, the neuroscience of anxiety as well. So in schools, what we do is we do webinars for parents, we do assemblies for children, we run support groups for children, we support staff with CPD. We run a whole program which is really around building NeuroNinjas, which is basically taking people from being brain bots, living in their brains, just following the programs of the brain, to being a NeuroNinja. And a NeuroNinja is somebody that understands what their brain is doing, how it operates, and how to work with it in a way that gets more out of it every single day. So it means thinking about ourselves in a completely new way. It's a revolutionary paradigmatic shift in our thinking. In a similar way to, we moved from a position where we thought the earth was at the center of everything and everything revolved around the earth, and then Copernicus came along, did a bunch of calculations, Galileo did a bunch of calculations, got into a bit of trouble with the Catholic Church, but the sun became the center of the solar system, and we were part of a galaxies, and actually the level of awe in our experience increased. When we understand what we actually are, how the brain works, the level of awe in our experience increases. We are the recipients of one of the greatest gifts that biology has bestowed on any animal, and that is the incredible human brain. So if we can unleash in kids the understanding of how their brain works, if we can support parents to do the same, we're in a place where we can help people enact the dreams that they have in their lives. People are walking around inside a paradigm, inside a version of themselves, which is not a true reflection of the potential that they have. So we've got our website, actionyourpotential.org. There's loads of stuff on there about some of the stuff I'm talking about, lots of stuff about the 12 rocks of well-being. We are focused on supporting parents, and these are skills that will one day be taught in all schools. They're the metacognitive skills that transform learning, and we can start at a very early age. So we're working with early years, primary, secondary, and post 16 to enthuse, engage, inform, excite people about the potential at the top of their necks. So we're taking all of our stuff from lots of evidence-based work in psychology, the kind of capacity of the human brain to put itself at the center of its own operation, mentalizing, and metacognition. Now, metacognition is, as you'll know as teachers, that ability to choose your kind of thinking tool, your response to a particular situation. And this Build a NeuroNinja program that I'm talking about has got 3 strands: well-being, how to manage the mind, and unleashing learning through daily behaviors. And we run seminars and webinars for parents and CPD sessions for teachers. I was doing a CPD session for trainee teachers on Monday. And we've got 110 videos in a resource bank which take children through questions they would ask about their brain, give them an answer about their brain, and then give them a daily habit to enact as a result. So the first thing I want to talk about is well-being and the skill called Do Your Rocks, which is the first skill of the NeuroNinja program. So a little bit of neuroscience now. What we know from neuroscience is we know the answer to the question, who am I? That great philosophical conundrum. Our brain builds our mind every day. That experience you have when you wake up in the morning, that groggy experience that gets dispelled by coffee for some of us, can last between 20 and 50 minutes, is called sleep inertia. The brain is going from a sleep state to a waking state, and it's constructing that day's mind. What does that mean? It's connecting up circuits across the whole brain, the prefrontal cortex, the emotional systems. The whole brain is generating the mind for that day. The mind is the model the brain builds of its own operation. It's the way the brain communicates with itself, and therefore our mind changes every day. It changes a little bit on the basis of what our brain's done. So our brain, when it encodes new information, that's available in our mind. We pick up a new habit, and that's available in our mind. All of those processes begin in our brain, and we found this out quite a few years ago, back in the late 1980s, in some experiments in laboratories. We found out that when people, for example, willed their hand to move, what the neuroscientists found with people with little ECG caps on their heads, they found out that the area of the brain that moves their hand was already moving their hand before they felt the will to move their hand, because the brain makes the decisions. We are our brains. The mind is the image the brain builds of its own operation. So physical, mental health are the same thing. They're not separate from each other, even though we still treat them as separately at the moment. I blame Descartes in the 16th century. 50% of how we feel today, right now, is down to what we've done in the previous 24 hours. So what we did was you just looked at all the research and explored what those habits need to be. What are the 12 rocks on which well-being is founded? What are the 12 rocks on which a stable experience of the mind is built? And it's built from these activities. All of them are required to create good connections between every part of the brain. Now, I haven't got time to go into all of them in extensive detail, but sleep does huge amounts for the brain. If you get less than 6 hours sleep, you've got 30% less memory the next day. You're more emotional the next day. You've got higher blood pressure the next day. You're more socially anxious the next day. Exercise builds brain cells. It enables your brain to produce a hormone called brain-derived neurotrophic factor, which creates connections between the prefrontal cortex and the rest of the brain. The prefrontal cortex is just behind our forehead, and that is the site of executive function. That is the place where we make plans, strategize, where we give the best version of ourselves. Mindfulness and mind wandering, 2 networks in the brain. Mindfulness, deep breathing, focusing on our breathing, focusing our attention, turns on part of our nervous system called the parasympathetic nervous system, connected to the vagus nerve. In fact, as we'll talk about later on, 9 of these rocks turn on the body's natural calming down nervous system. Walking outside in nature does the same. Listening to music does the same. We're social beings. Talking to our friends, social connection does the same. Practicing gratitude and kindness activates the parasympathetic nervous system and also empathy circuits in our prefrontal cortex. We need to make sure that we're fitting in the 12 rocks of well-being. What we say as part of being a NeuroNinja is you plan your rest like you plan your work. If you don't get your 12 rocks of well-being in, you will be a less effective brain. You will be a less good version of yourself. And that's what we want for everyone. We want everyone to be the best version of themselves. So, as I said, 9 of these rocks turn on the parasympathetic nervous system, the body's natural calm down system. That system lowers blood pressure, it lowers heart rate, it actually opens up the arteries and helps the arteries clean themselves. It enables the brain to generate oxytocin, which is an incredibly important neurotransmitter and hormone that has effects all over the body. So our brain is a physical organ. It generates that experience of the mind, and there is no kind of difference between those processes of mental and physical health. The 12 rocks enable good balance with serotonin, one of the neurotransmitters, and dopamine, another neurotransmitter. And because I'm a nerd, you'd expect me to have my favorite neurotransmitter, and GABA is my favorite neurotransmitter because it is generated by some of those rocks and it causes those feelings of relaxation, helps us reduce anxiety, calms the entire system down. So I've mentioned the power of sleep, I've mentioned the power of exercise. Let's talk about, before we go to some questions, let's talk about skill 2, which is rock 6. So the NeuroNinja skill 2 is managing emotion. So managing emotion in relation to mental health and well-being is critical, because the way the brain naturally responds to emotion can sometimes be unhelpful. What we know from the neuroscience is that the brain registers emotional and social pain in the same space as it registers physical pain. It's in this area here between the thinking part of the brain and the emotional part of the brain. The emotional part of the brain is level with our ears, and the prefrontal cortex has got the solution focused circuits, it's got the thinking circuits. So in that space, that yellow space, that is where physical pain is registered in the anterior cingulate cortex, but so is emotional and social pain. That's registered in that area. So if you bang your leg, you have got a wound that you clean and you put a plaster on it, you look after it, you make sure it heals. If you have a difficult emotional experience, people are mean and nasty to you, you're really struggling, you're feeling that emotional pain in the anterior cingulate cortex, but there is no wound to clean. You need to process your emotional pain. Now, why am I talking about this in relation to learning? Because the impact of emotional pain on cognition is the same as the impact of physical pain on cognition. So if you're trying to do a maths test experiencing physical pain, like a toothache, your output cognitively is about 40% reduced. Psychologists, a weird breed, have done this to people in laboratories. They've given them experiences of pain, mild electric shocks, or asking them to put their hand in an ice bucket of water, and they've witnessed a reduction in cognitive output of between 30 or 40% on the same maths tests. Emotional pain has the same impact on cognitive ability as physical pain does. It's really important that we support students to understand that this phrase that I was sold a lot when I was a kid, sticks and stones may break my bones, but names will never hurt me, is not true, nor is big boys don't cry and, you know, tough it out. All of that kind of conversation about resilience, it needs to be much more flexible about understanding what's going on. Emotional pain is registered in the brain and it needs to be processed. So how can we process it? What can we do? We need to name the experiences we're having to tame them. We cannot keep track of all the thousands of emotions we have every day, but we need to be able to name those emotional experiences to tame those emotional experiences. And brains that can name the experiences they're having, I feel sad today because, I feel angry today because, I feel happy today because, are in the game of being able to process that emotional pain. The linguistic areas in the prefrontal cortex are able to support the emotional centers, which are pre-linguistic, and get that emotion processed. talk to other people, talk to other people's prefrontal cortexes about our emotional experiences. So one of the habits that we say, and this slide here, the daily life experiment, is one of the daily life experiments that we suggest that people try if they're struggling with their emotions, is what went well today? How did I feel? What emotions were involved? In fact, we encourage parents and teachers to sit down with students and the parents to sit down with their children in the evening and just explore these sorts of questions and begin to start a daily habit with your parents or with your friends after school. What went well today? How did I feel? What emotions were involved? So you're enabling your brain to begin to process that emotional pain. And if you don't do that processing of emotional pain, you end up carrying that emotional pain around, and it will come out in ways that are less able to kind of be controlled. And we talk a lot about this idea of kindness and unkind people being people generally that are carrying sacks of emotional pain. So they're grumpy and angry and shouty because they're not processing their emotional pain. And that begins a different level of conversation with parents and a different level of conversation with children, because brains that don't process their emotional pain are not going to be effective learning brains. They're not going to make progress. And how many of us supporting young people know that the turmoil and difficulties they're experiencing in their home lives are having huge impacts, not simply on their kind of emotional lives, but also on their learning lives. Okay, I've reached the end of that kind of section. I won't show that video because I don't think it'll play very well, but I'm just going to pause briefly. And so if Louise has if there's any questions, but just to, before I do that, just to say, self-care is not a self-indulgence. It is about all of us, whatever age we are, understanding that we need to look after our brains to build the best version of ourselves every day. And that we do that because we want to be the best version for the people that we serve and the people that we love and care for. So I don't know if there's any questions.
Oh, sorry. Perfect. Yeah. So we have a couple of moments just for if you have any questions. If you wanted to pop them in the questions box, I'll just give you a couple of moments to do that. And if any come through, we'll discuss them with Andrew. So do feel free, if you have any questions about anything that's been talked about so far, do pop that in the questions box, which you'll find as part of the panel that you've got there. Pop it in and then we'll put them to Andrew. So I'll just give you a couple of moments. Okay, I don't know, we've not got anything come through yet. So oh, there we go. Got some observations about the length of sleep and the time. So I think maybe the question's around, it's surprising that that amount of sleep can have such an impact. So would it vary between people, or has it been shown that actually that's quite hard and fast figures, that if you have that amount of sleep or the little sleep, then that's really going to have that impact on everyone?
Yeah, so basically, all the things that are on those rocks are very deeply researched. It wouldn't be in this presentation if it wasn't backed up with lots of studies. So in relation to sleep, lots of us claim that whatever, we can survive on 6 hours sleep. Yes, we can, but actually our brain needs generally, there's a very, 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 very rare genetic condition, which is unlikely that anyone listening to this has got, that means you can get away with a little less sleep. But it's like 1 in 10 million people. It's really rare. All of us need about 8 to 9 hours sleep a night. You need a lot more when you're a kid, sort of 10 hours when you're young. But basically, sleep does a whole bunch of amazing things. So for example, sleep consolidates memory. At night, the self has collapsed. It's out of the way. The brain can communicate across different networks. It can move information from one network, the hippocampus, for example, a center of working memory, and begin to encode it. The brain cleans itself at night. The glial cells that support neurons contract, and cerebral spinal fluid drains through the brain, cleaning the brain. The brain processes emotion during dreaming sleep. And we are now, through the wonders of neuroscience, able to unpick all the amazing things that sleep does for us every day. So if we don't get enough sleep, and we are a chronically sleep deprived people since really the invention of the electric light, when you strip out data around the electric light and around other issues around diabetes and issues with kind of junk food and all of those sorts of things, you see an upswing in cancer, diabetes, Alzheimer's, with the reduction in sleeping hours that we've been doing for the last 120 years, really, since the invention of the electric light. There's a direct link between sleep, which we might see as a waste of time, but actually it's evolved to do a bunch of things, and it's fundamental to our kind of well-being, as is every other one of those rocks, with equal levels of nerdy detail.
Yeah, perfect. And that goes some way probably to answer some of the next question that we had, was about do we have to do all of the 12 stones? So if someone doesn't like music, for example, doesn't like listening to music, for example, but you just mentioned that actually they all have equal importance.
Yeah, so basically I find that hard to believe, that not listening to music. Okay, I think in terms of music connects up the brain in lots of ways that you don't really see apart from in NREM, non-rapid eye movement sleep. It makes a massive impact, music. So it can activate the sympathetic nervous system, which gets us ready for action. It can calm us down, and it connects the brain networks up in lots of supportive ways. I can think of studies where they've looked at people that have really struggled with their emotions because of difficult experiences in their life, and music evokes strong emotions, and so people can get themselves in knots around emotions and music. But generally the research is really strong that music is powerfully beneficial for our well-being.
Yeah, fab. That's all for now. Thank you, Andrew.
Okay, so let's go a little bit dark on a very dark December night and talk about anxiety and the neuroscience of anxiety. So we're living, deeply upsettingly, in a worst case scenario brain, a brain that evolved on the African savannah to deal with the threats that our ancestors faced every single day. And so those threats that our ancestors faced were all about survival. So we're living in a brain that really detests any sort of uncertainty. So think about that brain in the 21st century in the midst of a global pandemic. That is going to be really tough on the human brain. So we used to live in groups of 150 on the African savannah, and we were hunter-gatherers, and that brain is still the brain we're living with. And yet everything around that brain has changed, because one of the most powerful things about the human brain is culture, and the fact that we generate cultures, and cultures have bootstrapped us up, and civilization has increased the ability of humans to live with each other, and all the technology that's flowed as a result. But at bottom, our brain is a worst case scenario brain. So what does that mean? That means that whenever the brain experiences uncertainty, it's likely to pitch towards kind of negative thinking. And the reason for that is because negative thinking in the ancestral environment had enormous valency. So if you heard a noise behind a bush and you thought, maybe there's a predator down there, I won't go down that path, you lived longer. Whereas if you were a happy, joyful cave person and you said, I don't think that noise behind the bush is a predator, I'm just going to go down there, you got eaten. And you didn't get to pass on those happy, joyful genes to the rest of us. So a negatively biased mind, a worst case scenario mind, had massive survival value. Back then, all bad news was local news. There was no global news. It was all local news. Humans are obsessed with bad news. The reason brains are obsessed with bad news is because that information was really important in the ancestral past. So basically, whenever the brain spots uncertainty, it spots that first in the emotional brain. So we're living in a brain built for survival, a brain not particularly interested in happiness. Happiness is something we travel through and land out the other side. Brains deliver happiness to us when we get things that we need, like food, partners, all of those sorts of things. Eventually my dogs will all calm down. I don't know what's wrong with them. So we're built to survive, not built to be happy. This is a really good video, but I won't show it to you because it probably won't play very well. So what happens, I'm just waiting for them to stop. I think someone's about to come in the door, so hopefully you can't hear that barking as loudly as I can hear it. So basically what happens is whenever the brain spots uncertainty, the emotional brain responds to that uncertainty initially. And what that looks like is this area deep in the emotional brain called the amygdala ignites. What that means is it starts to respond to the situation. So, for example, if a car comes bowling around the corner towards you and it's a terrifying situation, your amygdala fires and it enacts a fight, flight, freeze response. You run out of the way of the car and you survive. But when we talk about the amygdala, we often just talk about the amygdala as if it's just the fear center. That's all it does. But that's not right. What the amygdala does is a whole bunch of other stuff. Its job is to get all sensory information first. So when it receives that sensory information, it's looking for uncertainty. It's looking for risks and rewards that are changing in the environment. And when a risk and reward changes in the environment, the amygdala works to get the attention of the prefrontal cortex, the bit at the front of the brain. How does it get the attention of the thinking processing circuits at the front of the brain? Those circuits come on more slowly, and they come up with solutions to the problems the brain spots. How does the amygdala get the attention of the prefrontal cortex? It uses highly negative thinking, highly charged, exaggerated emotional thinking, called cognitive distortions or automatic negative thoughts. So you'll recognize these. We have them as adults. Kids have a lot more of them because their brains have had less experience of the world, and therefore their brain responds more with very much louder cognitive distortions. So there's all or nothing thinking. There's catastrophizing, which is possibly my favorite cognitive distortion. So, to give you an example of catastrophizing, child at playtime sees friend across playtime, waves to friend, friend frowns instead of smiles and appears to blank child. Child then catastrophizes enormously about the fact that the friend doesn't like them anymore, will never talk to them again, and possibly go and speak to all their shared friends and then cut them off on social media, and they may as well never leave their bedroom. Catastrophizing, all or nothing thinking, minimization, predicting the worst, must, should, and ought statements, and my second favorite cognitive distortion, blame. These are all exaggerated responses of the emotional brain to change in the world. They have zero link to the solutions that the prefrontal cortex is going to come up with. So the amygdala is generating all these cognitive distortions, automatic thoughts, trying to get the attention at the front of the brain. The problem for lots of young people is they invest lots of energy in these cognitive distortions. They are the rapid emotional response of the brain. So they're rapid, but they're potentially inaccurate. So we need to support children to approach, and adults actually, there are lots of parents that experience lots of cognitive distortions as well. We need all of us to approach those cognitive distortions in a particular way where we recognize we can't stop cognitive distortions. As you'll see when you see the videos, they're automatic. They come on automatically whenever the amygdala spots change. But we need to capture them and say, hang on a minute, that event where that person frowned at me and I've catastrophized that, what's actually going on there? What is the problem? Maybe that frown isn't even to do with me. Maybe my friend is just worried about their dog was unwell when they left for school this morning, or maybe my friend's just got a bad maths test. Cognitive distortions are the first response of the emotional brain to complex situations, and their mission is to wake up the thinking parts of the brain, the solution focused circuits in the prefrontal cortex, which take longer to come on. So wind forward several million years, rock up in the 21st century, 8 billion people, where a tweet from the President of the United States or news or social media responses, there are so many ways that the brain can experience uncertainty. And that was before the global pandemic. One of the reasons for an upswing in anxiety is because uncertainty is felt as anxiety. Brains experience uncertainty a lot in the 21st century. We are going to feel more anxious in the 21st century simply because there's a whole heap more uncertainty out there. Brains detest uncertainty because they're prediction engines. They're trying to work out what's going to happen next. Why are they trying to do that? Because they want to get us through the next 24 hours. And if they can predict what's going to happen next, we can avoid difficulties. So we talk to young people a lot, and parents a lot, and teachers a lot about VUCA, volatility, uncertainty, complexity, and ambiguity, which is what the 21st century is full of, which upsets the amygdala and those uncertainty spotting circuits. And we can end up living in a brain full of cognitive distortions because our brain's constantly experiencing uncertainty, full of strong emotions. And we need to get ahead of that. We need to get into a space in our head where we recognize cognitive distortions coming out of our own head, coming out of the mouths of the people around us. And that churn, why have you felt so exhausted this year? That churn is exhausting. Our prefrontal cortex ultimately is the source of the calming down of the emotional brain. You'll see in a minute how it calms the emotional brain down. So that massive churn of negative emotions can be hugely, hugely exhausting, and it has been for lots of colleagues in lots of settings across the whole world at the moment because of that massive upswing in uncertainty caused by the pandemic. So there are lots of tiny little habits that begin to change this process, but start by noticing cognitive distortions. Listen out for them. Listen for them coming out of your mouth or coming out of the people around you's mouths. But just be a little bit careful when you point out other people's cognitive distortions, because they can get a bit upset if you point out their cognitive distortions live. Linked to this, let's talk about the neuroscience of anxiety. What the neuroscience of anxiety shows us is something very reassuring about the human brain. So when we talk to people about anxiety, we say, when your brain spots uncertainty, which is a normal response of the brain to a complex world, you will feel some anxiety. And rather than go with that and think, what's wrong with me? This always happens to me. This isn't fair, and get into a negative spiral, try and use CAKE, common humanity. Every human brain experiences uncertainty and feels that as anxiety. Be aware and accept that is the case. It's not great, but that's the case. That's the brain evolution has left us with. Kindly and curiously go in search of whatever the source of the uncertainty was. Was it something somebody said? Was it a thought you had? Was it you thinking about something that's going to happen in the future? Was it you ruminating on something that happened in the past? And then apply empathy to yourself or whoever is experiencing anxiety. Every single one of those steps, C, A, K, and E, lifts you into your solution focused circuits in your prefrontal cortex, engaging your prefrontal cortex in beginning to link with the amygdala. So if you go into the amygdala, deep in the amygdala, it's a lobe structure, and there are in fact 2 of them. There are very ancient fears stitched into the amygdala. So ancient fears, and if you don't like spiders and snakes, look away now. Most people find images of spiders and snakes mildly irritating, slightly annoying. Some people find them deeply upsetting. Most people shy away from spiders and snakes. Why is that? Because the amygdala has got stitched into it ancient primeval fears about spiders and snakes, because in the ancestral environment, spiders and snakes were venomous and needed to be avoided. And so that's got stitched into the amygdala. If the amygdala updated its software as often as Windows does, the amygdala would have our children frightened of PowerPoints and hot pans. But unfortunately, the amygdala doesn't work that quickly. Why am I talking about this? I'm talking about this because there's a kid at a school I work at with a pet spider called Barry, and he doesn't experience avoid emotions to his pet spider. He's very kind of warm and supportive towards his pet spider. He loves his pet spider. What has happened in that kid's brain for him overturn the response of his amygdala to spiders? Generally, if you show people images of spiders, their amygdala lights up. It's automatic. You can't do anything about it. What happens in this kid and anyone who's got a pet spider? Well, what happens for all of us throughout our lives, the prefrontal cortex teaches our amygdala what not to be frightened of. And you literally see this in the brain scans. The prefrontal cortex, directly connected with the emotional brain, once it's been activated in response to the amygdala, will send information back, cognitive information back, that will change the valency of cells in the amygdala and say, actually, we're not frightened of spiders. That's Barry. We love Barry. The PFC teaches the amygdala what not to be frightened of throughout our lives. So, I work with lots of young people experiencing anxiety and supporting their families. What anxiety does is lock you down, and it tells you can't do things, and it asks you to stay at home and avoid things. And if you give in to anxiety completely, it will take over. It doesn't disappear if you remove the source of it. So if you've got social anxiety and you remove, any connection with other people, not only does it kind of plunge you deeper into a feeling of lowness and anxiety and depression. But the anxiety will begin to kind of attach itself to something else as well. The solution to anxiety, supportively, is to first of all to begin to understand what's happening in your brain, and then second of all to begin to challenge the anxiety, but in a way that you can cope with, in a way that you can respond to. So adult brains worry for 100 minutes a day. Children's brains worry for about 240 minutes a day, according to a big study looking at both children and adult worries. So the average time that kids spend worrying is much greater. Why is that? Because their prefrontal cortexes have had less experience of life. They've got less information to send back to the amygdala to calm it down. What do we do when we're really worried? We should talk to other people about the particular problems we're having. We're getting their prefrontal cortexes involved. And for children, it's often our prefrontal cortexes that are supporting children in calming down. So anxiety, normal reaction of a brain to new situations, and really important not to pathologize natural anxiety. It's a natural response of a human brain to uncertainty. And then to talk to young people and children in an inspiring and supportive way about designing desirable difficulties to supportively challenge their anxiety. So, you know, scout camp often causes lots of worries before it happens. And then when children go on their scout camp, they have a fantastic experience. Their prefrontal cortex calms their amygdala down. And while their parents may still be sitting at home worrying, they're feeling great and thoroughly enjoying themselves and really pleased they actually went on that experience. And you can make those desirable difficulties really tiny. Working with a 8-year-old girl a few years ago, really shy, just working with her on going into a shop and buying a chocolate bar and what she was going to say in the queue. This is obviously before social distancing and all of those things. Working with a very inspiring young man who wanted to go to rock concerts but hated crowds, just loved rock concerts. So we just worked on going into a very busy station week after week after week after week to help him manage through lots of calm down strategies his overactive sympathetic nervous system, so he could ultimately calm his system down and go to the rock concerts that he wanted to. So apply cake when you're feeling anxious. It's a habit, a series of habits that moves you into your prefrontal cortex, engaging your prefrontal cortex sooner so it can go back and calm your amygdala down more quickly. Okay, I'm overrun slightly. I've got about 3 minutes. If you've got any questions, bung them in the chat. So when we're working with people on anxiety, we talk about the effect of VUCA, volatility, uncertainty, complexity, and ambiguity on the nervous system. And the 12 rocks I mentioned earlier counteract VUCA by enacting our parasympathetic nervous system, our calm down system. For those nerdy people out there like me, there it is. It's plumbed into all those different parts of our body. We've got our go system, gets us ready for action, and our parasympathetic nervous system that calms us down. Think of it as a brake and an accelerator. They come on automatically, but we can equally turn them on ourselves through our behavior. So if we're feeling really stressed and anxious, going for a walk with a friend will really help that process. We kind of know that intuitively, but we should build it into our day every single day. And actually working with young people, design portable calm down strategies in a calm down toolbox that they can carry around with them that will help them activate their parasympathetic nervous system, which means that the amygdala will be soothed because the prefrontal cortex will be engaged, and blood flow will reduce and blood pressure will reduce and breathing rate will calm down and pulse rate will calm down. And there are lots of different ways that you can build a personal calm down toolbox to support young people. So to go back to the rocks, these do a bunch of things every single day. And if we're going to be the best version of ourselves every single day, we need to take well-being seriously. We're all living in a brain that is much more similar than we think. Every person is wonderfully different because their brain has wired itself up in completely different ways as a result of the interaction of their genetics with their environment. So nature via nurture through a fascinating science called epigenetics. So we're all completely different in terms of our experience so that builds a different brain. So that builds a different person built on the genes, but the processes underneath, if you stand back far enough from the brain, are pretty similar. And these rocks of well-being make a huge, huge difference. We are bodies with brains that generate minds. Once we understand that about ourselves, it is amazing, and it unleashes a different kind of response, because we often think we can think our way out of particular situations, and often that's absolutely right. But equally, if we're feeling very low and demotivated, it might be because we've been sitting at the computer all day. We've not been eating the right sorts of food. We're not getting enough sleep. There's a whole set of activities that go on very quietly behind the scenes that impact on our brain that the brain is not often aware of. And to finish off, just to show the kind of the nature of that, there's a fascinating study in the US where they looked at judges hearing parole before and after lunch. So judges hearing parole before lunch let less people out on parole than those after lunch, because they were effectively hangry judges. They were grumpy because they were hungry, but they hadn't recognized that hunger and just decided those criminals they were hearing the cases of before lunch just didn't deserve parole, and the ones afterwards did. But that, when they looked at that long-term study, they found out that it was literally nothing to do with the case and everything to do with the physiological state of the judge. So I think I'll finish there to give you enough time to finish the poll and to ask any questions.
Thank you, Andrew. Yeah, if you have any questions, please do pop them in the questions box. Anything that Andrew's talked about today, anything about how to take it forward, maybe in your own practice, possibly. And just to reiterate that we do have another session coming up as well. I think Andrew's got a slide on that actually that we'll cover next time. So any last chances for questions, and then I've just got a couple of evaluation questions to ask you guys. I'd really appreciate if you could just hang on for. So it doesn't look like there's any more questions coming through. I think you've probably answered them all, Andrew, which is amazing. In that case, I think I will just give you, more coming through. Okay, lovely. So a question about in the study that you talked about, kind of children and adults. Andrew, do you know what age did they class, what's the age that a child becomes an adult in that study? What ages were they looking at?
So in that study, they were looking at children sort of below the age of sort of 12, and they were looking at adults sort of north of 25. So it wasn't particularly looking at teenagers. It was just one snapshot of kind of issues of worry. And, like most psychological studies, they're kind of then repeated in lots of different ways.
Yeah, perfect. Thank you. Just a question now about the second session. So it is a standalone session, isn't it? So it will kind of sit by itself, but kind of link in maybe a little bit to what you're saying, but both don't have to be seen. So just a question about, is it possible to attend the second session without having seen the first one? So
No, that's a
yes.
really good question. No, absolutely, it would be. I mean, the theme that coheres them is the brain science and the impact that can have when we apply it to our daily experience, and that we're going to look at the 10 leaps in learning next time, which are the 10 daily behaviors that we need to engage in to make sure we're capturing the learning experiences. And one of those leaps is about well-being, which is that fourth step there. For example, right now, children just come out of school for the day, and unless they're going back over their learning tonight, their brain is going to forget 70% of it by tomorrow. And there's nothing their teachers can do about it. And there's everything their kids and the parents can do about it if they just do some basic study review, which is one of the things that we work with the kids that we're working in the schools with on that whole process. Basically, our brains are sieves. They're designed to be sieves for information. And so if you go back over content in the evenings a little bit, you've got a much better chance of retaining it. So that's one of the habits. There's lots of other ones looking at the power of quizzing and those sorts of things. But it's really the whole idea of the program is in a single day, if you did all these habits, wow, what an amazing day you'd have.
That's amazing. Thank you. I think we've run out of time for questions, unfortunately. So what I'm going to do is just ask if you wouldn't mind just filling in those couple of polls for me. I'm going to launch them now. So I'm just launching the first one. It should come up on your screen. I'll just give you a couple of moments to answer that. And then once you have, I will have another one for you to answer. So thank you so much for answering those. Just waiting for the responses to come in. Okay, yeah, lovely, thank you. Just have another one for you. Just launching that now. And again, I'll give you a couple of moments just to have a look at that one. Yeah, I think that's everyone. Lovely, thank you. Okay, I'll just launch the next one for you. Lovely, and just one more. That's perfect. Thank you so much. So I just want to kind of finish the webinar by saying thank you so much to Angie for sharing all of that really, really useful information and getting us to think about our brains and how we can make better use of them. And that's a lot to kind of take forward for sure. And I really do hope that you can join us for the next session, which will be taking place at the same time, but on the 13th of January, we'll be looking at these 10 leaps in learning. We're going to stick around just if you have any further questions. We've got a couple of more minutes just in case you wanted to ask anything else. I know a couple more questions came through, so you guys obviously had some more things to think about, particularly around the 12 stones. So if you did want to kind of hang on and maybe hear another question, you're very welcome to. I know there was some anxiety around maybe what if you can't do all of the 12 stones, and if you can't, would that cause more anxiety? And if you had any thoughts on that, Andrew, just really, really quickly in the last kind of couple of minutes.
That's a really good point. So, you know, any more of those stones is really helpful, and you can do lots of them at the same time. So you can walk outside, listen to music. Basically, it is possible to get them all in. Obviously, if you can't get them all in, then that's kind of, you know, it's fine. But to raise your well-being, you know, work with young people all the time to raise your well-being. If you enact those habits, you slowly but surely climb a staircase out of the cellar in your mind, and you reach a place where you're in a more balanced nervous system. One of the big issues for lots of anxious young people is they're spending way too much time in their sympathetic nervous system, and those 12 rocks are about supporting children to move themselves from that space up. So obviously, if you can't get them all in, that's fine, but you know, it's about prioritizing our well-being alongside all the other things that we have to do.
Yeah, perfect. Thank you so much, Andrew, and thank you everyone for listening. I will be sending through those links to all the YouTube videos in the email you'll be receiving after this. I will also see if I can pop them in the chat now, actually, and see if that works. But I will be popping them in the email that you'll get probably a couple of days after, with the link to these and also to the recording as well. So I'll see if I can pop that in the chat to you guys now. And then we'll be finishing up. So hopefully you'll have got those YouTube links. I'll just press send. But again, like I said, I'll pop them in the link you'll be sent out with a link to recording, but also to those YouTube videos as well. So do have a little look in your own time. And we really do hope that we'll see you at the next session. So thank you very much for listening. Have a lovely evening, and hope to see you next time in the new year. So thank you very much, and thank you, Andrew.
Thank you, everyone. Happy New Year and happy Christmas. Have a lovely Christmas.